America suffers from a kind of divided soul, this double consciousness. We imagine ourselves as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. And you can't be both without depositing a kind of madness at the heart of the country. And then there are the folks who have to bear the brunt of the madness.
Hi there, everyone. There is no one with whom I have shared more of the history of the last 10 years on live television than this week's guest. From tragic breaking news stories to devastating political outcomes to the daily dose of grief handed to the nation from the COVID-19 pandemic, this week's guest has put words to our collective grief like none other. He's also cut through the lies of the Trump era with epic clarity. And it is in that vein of epic, sometimes uncomfortable clarity that this week's guest, Eddie Glaude, joins us to discuss his essential new book. Eddie is someone I turn to on a weekly, sometimes daily basis to understand exactly how we get through this moment. His new book is called America USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries, and it could not be more timely this week and any week. So without any further ado, this is The Best People, and this is my dear friend, one of the best people I know, Eddie Glaude. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nicole. You have me blushing over here. Thank you so much.
Well, you make me cry and blush on a near regular basis. And I just wanted to start with, I think we first met on the set of Morning Joe. And while everyone else was sort of chugging coffee and taking in whatever hilarity Heilman or Billy or, a particle delivered, you just cut right to the bone all the time. Where does that come from?
I don't know. Maybe I'm a professor, but it's part of what it means to be a teacher. But I want to just say that those moments, you always get a little bit of heaven in the context of ordinary time. And, our efforts in those early days and our relationship that we've established over these years, we've been doing God's work. And I feel so blessed from that first encounter to today. But I think it comes from, being from Mississippi and not wanting my mother and my father to yell at me for not telling the truth, and being a professor, I think.
But the truth isn't what it used to be, right? Like the truth gets shaved off from people wanting to please, not really the people that we surround ourselves with, but a lot of people who do this. Social media has changed how willing people are to tell the truth. Donald Trump has changed how willing people are to tell the truth. But you've never wavered, ever. And I admire that so much.
Thank you for saying that. I think two things. One, I have a job. I'm a Princeton professor. This is what I do. And two, the only reason why I think I'm on television, the only reason why I think I have a public platform is to say what I think is the truth. I think Americans are hungry for what the theologian Howard Thurman called the sound of the genuine. They want to hear it because we're so awash in lies. And so I take it as my task to listen intently, right? To try to bring the fullness of my bibliography, what I've read, what I know, to bear on a subject, and to think with others, to think with you and your audience, to think with those folks together. And I think we model something. I remember one time, Nicole, we were talking about something, and I was going to reference the Bush years, and you said, "Let's go there," without blinking.
Yeah.
And it was an example of the kind of background condition that allows us to do what we do together. And that is to just simply speak from the heart and the mind to your audience every chance we get.
Well, I mean, just to pull the curtain back a little bit, there are days where breaking news intervenes and we blow up our show. But I think increasingly it's been almost 10 years since we've had our show. We want you no matter the development. And I think some of that relationship that you have with our audience was forged during the pandemic, where we dealt with what I think everyone was feeling, but no one was dealing with, and that was the collective grief. And we talk about that a lot on and off TV. I wonder if you can just sort of share some of what we talk about, how the country is still rumbling with grief that it's never processed.
Yeah, I don't think we're okay. We haven't, you know, you have all those empty chairs around the kitchen table, and you got these rolling anniversaries where
Yeah.
people who were once here are no longer here. You know, I think it's something unique about the United States. You know, we had the Spanish flu, and immediately we called it the Roaring Twenties. We don't linger around death too long, and so you have all of this unresolved grief. I remember saying to you that something to the effect that what we've experienced is the privatization of grief.
Hmm.
There were no public rituals, no kind of daily reckoning with our dead. And that's when, and I remember you deciding with the show that you were going to end every show by talking about someone. And I don't know, it was so heart wrenching to watch you do it every single
It still
day.
makes me cry. It still makes me cry thinking about it.
Every single day, but it was
Yeah.
part of, you know, it's I think if anything I bring to your show and to television, I'm always coming from the moral angle, even when I'm talking about politics. The choices we make, the events of the day, the horrors that we have to report. I'm just thinking about our response. Our response to it all has everything to do with what kind of people we are and who we aspire to be. So I'm always trying to get that moral question, that ethical question on front and center. And thank God you allow me to do it every time I'm on with you.
Thank God you come and are willing to do it every day and every time you're on. I remember, I think we were covering a mass shooting
El Paso.
in El Paso with the manifesto that revealed some racial animus, and we were dealing with it. We were talking about ties to things that were in the ugly sort of right-wing media ecosystem. And you made the point that this is who we are.
What we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us.
It still gives me chills, and I think it lived in that moment. It sort of stopped everything in the studio. I think it stopped everything on live TV, but it's lived on the internet for a really long time. Why do you think that cuts through still?
I don't know. I think it has something to do with, you know, how impassioned I was at the time, how I was I think I gave voice to some things that people were feeling. And you know, you're like amazing jazz conductor. You give people space to play, to breathe, and so you didn't interrupt. You just watched me kind of move through my emotions. And you know, I was writing Begin Again at the time, and so Baldwin came out in this way about no, 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 no. We can't isolate this. We have to confront it. This is us. And you know, I can remember the next morning I woke up and oh my God, it was crazy in terms of the reaction.
I guess what I feel with you on the set is that this is the only way to do it in a way that it's worth anything. And I think it's such a gift. Like I think the thing about the phone is that all the news is there. And so everyone and anyone that watches the show is a guest in our house, right? And what you do better than perhaps anyone else is feel things with them. And I think the other period of time when I leaned on you more than just about anybody else was after George Floyd was murdered.
Oh my God, yeah.
And to talk about what it means to have a Black son out driving around the streets of any American city, you know, the things that you say to them, no white person could understand that. They could try to learn it and they could try to be empathetic. But I remember you sharing that experience and feeling like, I don't know that I could do that. I don't know that I could put that fear and that terror out there.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes we talk and we're worried about how it's going to land,
Yeah.
and so you have these filters, There's this inside discourse. How am I going to talk with Black people about this issue? How am I going to talk with you? And part of what I try to do in those moments is to just speak across those divisions. Okay, this is the raw feeling. I'm not going to be concerned about how it lands. The man cried for his mom, right? We all
Mhm.
watched it. And, you know, in some of those days, some of those moments, I teared up, you teared up, but it wasn't sentimentality, right? It wasn't just about performing our own virtue. And I think what's so important about us having those moments together, Nicole, is that ideologically people think this is odd, right? There's a sense our journeys to that studio from where we've come. And then for us to just have these moments where it's not about party divisions, it's not about politics, it's about the humanity of folk, of the moment, and for us to give voice to it. George Floyd, that whole situation, it broke my heart. And I don't mean that in any silly kind of way. I just like today, I don't know what to do with the reality that we're here
Mhm.
without just simply telling the truth. And it seems to me that that's what you want me there for, and
That's
that's
what
what I
I
do.
that's what I need you there for. I mean,
Yeah.
but I also think that, and I raise those moments because they're so seared in my brain. But I think they're the blocks that let people feel the horrors of Minneapolis.
Mm.
And I think that something about everything we've said so far today is that the the truth isn't always what you want to hear, but it's never wrong because it's just the truth. And I think there's something about the humanity with which you covered other difficult moments that enhanced our ability to talk about the immigration excesses, which are the first and maybe most brutal and most public feature of Trump's second term. All of that credibility, I think, between you and the audience was built segment after segment, year after year, leading up to Minneapolis. Will
Mm.
you talk about covering the second Trump term with us and
Yeah,
what that's
yeah.
like?
No, it's first I had to deal with all the disappointment, right? Because at the end of Begin Again, I said that the country had to make a choice.
Hmm.
Would we double down on the ugliness of Trumpism, or would we decide to be otherwise? And the country made its choice.
Hmm.
And I had to grapple with that. And then I saw the implications, right? I mean, we had, do you remember Buffalo? Oh my
Mhm.
God, we had
Mhm.
to grapple with, Garnell Whitfield's his mother being killed and all the ugliness there. And then here we were in the midst of child separation, and then we saw Minneapolis. And so part of what I had to do is to say, okay, now this is what we chose. This is what we chose. Now, what does this mean about who we are? Right? Because it's always going back to the moral question, right? What does this say about who we are? My wife hates when I say we, and she hates it's not us, it's them. I said, no, 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 it's us. We're all in this together.
Well, we're all
And
here. Yeah, we're all here.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
we're all
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And so the idea was to kind of really just kind of always trying to turn us inside out to see what's moving us in the gut. And that requires a confrontation with the ugliness, not a remembrance, but a confrontation. Recently, I said, we have to name the devil that has us by the throat. And if we don't name it, we can't address it. And it seems to me that I'm always trying to name it. Now, I get in a lot of trouble for doing so, but I'm always trying to name what has us by the throat. And so that's how I've been trying to approach this um, since day one. But we have been, Nicole, as the poet Gwendolyn Brooks would say, we've been in the whip of the whirlwind, and it's hard to keep one's balance.
So I say all that as sort of preamble to the first line of the new book. I do not love America. Explain.
Yeah, so there that sentence, oh, when I wrote it, I jumped up and started pacing. It was fear. I don't know what I can't write this sentence. And then I said, but I have to write the sentence. It came out. So it's working on three registers. One, it's announcing that I'm very skeptical of the idolatry of the state. Love abstractions. We love
Mhm.
people. Two, I wanted to announce that I don't begin where Baldwin begins.
Mm.
Baldwin says, "I love my country, and because of that," I'm paraphrasing, of course, "I reserve the right to criticize it perpetually." Instead, I begin with wound, which is the third register. I grew up in Mississippi, and I tell the story. My dad was the second African American hired in the post office in Pascagoula. We lived in Moss Point, which was the black labor force to Pascagoula. This is Pascagoula is Trent Lott's district,
Mhm.
right? And I'm playing with my Tonka truck, and my new friend, we were having a ball playing with those old Tonka trucks. And his dad came out and he said, "Stop playing with that N word." And I had to pick up my truck and go inside. And the world, America, told me what it thought about me that day.
Mhm.
And then my parents had to get to work to teach me not only how to survive it, but not to believe it.
Mhm.
I don't begin with love. So here I'm asking that hard question, that provocative question. Why would you expect me to? Why would you expect me to love the country that's gutted the Voting Rights Act, that's redrawing districts, that's empowered a gaggle of white nationalists? What from whence this expectation? So I give the question back to you. Why would you think I would love the country given my formation? And that's an affront to some people when I ask it that way.
How has that been received?
Oh, it's been really weird. So some people will say, and overwhelming in some ways. Some people will say, "You should be grateful. The country made you. This is the greatest country on earth. You wouldn't be who you are. You're rich, like you teach at Princeton. You're well off. Your parents couldn't have imagined your life. America made this.
Mhm,
Gratitude is
mhm.
the expectation. Sounds like J.D. Vance." Um, and then there's I remember I did this interview, Nicole. You'd find this fascinating. I had just been on a panel, and a young man, he was a older millennial, was trying to ask me about the first question sentence, and he couldn't say it. He just couldn't let it come out of his mouth. I guess it was fear. And then I realized, I said, I guess I wrote the sentence to give you permission to say it. And you know what? Across the country, people have been saying, I had similar experience. I don't begin there.
Mhm.
Right? I love people, but I don't, this place. And then when I say, a certain kind of patriotism, a certain kind of idolatry of the state sounds to my ear like a rebel yell,
Mhm.
because I don't know what kind of politics comes in tow with folks who wrap themselves in the flag when it comes to people like me. And then I'm giving people a permission structure, our favorite phrase, permission structure to kind of delve deeper into their feelings and emotions about their relationship to the country.
I mean, I think since you probably wrote that sentence, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. The Republicans are gerrymandering majority minority districts out of existence, like not just messing with them, but eliminating them.
Hmm.
And white supremacists like Nick Fuentes seem to have a platform and defenders in polite society. So it seems that the right is trying to tell you you might have a point.
Yeah, because going back to the first part of our conversation, all the work that we did in the midst of a racial reckoning, which I use that phrase with you, and then here we are, and this is when I was writing the book,
Mhm.
because I wrote it in this manic mode. I wrote it in 9 months, Nicole.
Mm.
Um, and I'm trying to make sense of it all. I said, well, the only thing I can conclude, because in the blink of an eye, we're here. After all of the work we were doing, the only thing I could conclude is that people were lying. You weren't telling
Mhm.
me the truth. You were performing. Because how can we arrive here so quickly? And that's that rage that kind of seeps to the top of the page, right? Um, and so, I think the evidence is in. We're in a second lost cause. We're in a second redemption. And this goes back to one of the central claims of the book. America suffers from a kind of divided soul, this double consciousness. We imagine ourselves as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. And you can't be both without depositing a kind of madness at the heart of the country. And then there are the folks who have to bear the brunt of the madness.
Why do you think JD Vance is so willing to write and say things that could very easily prove all your points?
because he believes it.
You think so? He called Trump America's Hitler.
Yeah, but I think, there's there when I read Hillbilly Elegy, right? There there are elements, there's an application of certain kind of Charles Murray-esque like formulations to the white poor, but there's something about the way he's ambitious beyond any limit. So
Mhm.
he'll morph into anything. But
Mhm.
I think ultimately, um, I think he believes some of this stuff about the nation. When I hear him at July 5th, 2025, at the Claremont Institute
Mhm.
saying America is not a creedal nation.
If you think about it, identifying America just with agreeing with the principles, let's say, of the Declaration of Independence, that's a definition that is way over-inclusive and under-inclusive at the same time. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, it would include hundreds of millions, maybe billions of foreign citizens who agree with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Must we admit all of them tomorrow? If you follow that logic of America as a purely creedal nation, America purely as an idea, that is where it would lead you.
That's insane.
On the day after July 4th, we're not a creedal nation, he basically gave a blood and soil speech. I was like, this is, and he's part of the Nationalist Conservatives group.
Yeah.
He's part of the Claremont Institute group. And when you begin to dig deep into those particular intellectual spaces, you see what you see. And what you see is a kind of the intellectual scaffolding of a white nationalist agenda that he seems to be committed to.
Which is more dangerous, that and those adherents, or Donald Trump's, I think decades of smearing the Central Park Five and racist rental practices? Or is
Mm.
it the combination that's so dangerous?
It's the combination because Donald Trump's kind of carnival barker kind of approach, right, has a kind of popular currency. But the actual effort to rip out the entrails of the infrastructure of the mid 20th century, to dismantle the good society, to dismantle the New Deal, this infrastructure of the civil rights movement and what came out of it. These people are engaging in a wholesale attack, and they have an intellectual rationale for it.
Which
Um,
is what? Which is what?
that they believe that the country is fundamentally a white republic. B, they are deeply skeptical of the overreach of government on behalf of folk who they don't believe to be central to their idea of the American Republic. And to be honest with you, they hold a view of the founding. This is a kind of small point, but they hold a view of the founding where America's perfection was secured in its beginnings. Any talk about more perfect union, right, slanders the
Mm.
American project.
Mhm.
So we can't talk about Black folk or women or working folk or LGBTQ plus communities as being a part of an ongoing effort to live up to the ideals of the
Mhm.
country, because for these folk, those ideals were secured in the beginning, and that's all we need to do is to remember and restore.
But what's so nuts about that is that I mean, that would leave 51% of the voting public out of, I mean, women didn't vote either. I mean, it's insane. And they obviously don't, well, I don't know, maybe they do mean that. Do you think they mean that?
Yeah, when the guy, the heavyweight champion or whomever said, Michelle Obama is a man. At that moment, you saw the convergence of two what seemingly are distinctive moments, but they're linked. So you saw this racialized body with regards to this Black woman, but also this fear of trans, because you have the manosphere in its ugliest forms on the internet, driving this muscular performance of masculinity because they believe women are the source of the downfall of the empire. And you can see it across the board in the way in which that discourse links with great replacement. We're not having enough babies, undermining Roe versus Wade. I mean, all of this stuff is connected. It's hard to kind of draw lines, but the lines are there.
Eddie, take me through the anniversaries because I mean,
Yeah.
I've covered the Trump administration's efforts to whitewash and erase history as insane. But But when you really look at our history, you can see that the first half of the project only works if you erase our history.
Yeah, so oftentimes we want to exceptionalize Trump just like we exceptionalize the South. If only the South would live up to the ideals of democracy, then we would be okay as a country. When in fact, as Malcolm X said, as long as you're south of the Canadian border, you're in the South, right? The South is the beating heart of the nation. So they can't bear the burden of our sins, just as Trump can't bear the burden of our sins. So I looked at these, every president demands a past to account for it. So I looked at this, here we are, the 250th, all of this hell's breaking loose. And I said, well, why don't I look at these milestone anniversaries and see what's going on? 1876, Reconstruction is collapsing. That's a generous word. It's being murdered. And it's the first national ritual post the carnage of the Civil War. And this is the story that encapsulates it. The most famous American, one of the most famous Americans is Frederick Douglass. The most famous orator in the country is Frederick Douglass. He has an invitation to sit on the dais with President Grant. He's trying to enter the exposition, the Philadelphia Exposition, which was wildly successful. Millions of Americans came. A Philadelphia police officer sees his ticket and said, there's no way an N-word can be on the dais. And if it wasn't for a senator who saw his big white mane, Frederick Douglass would have never gotten in. But guess what? He gets on the dais and they just sit him there. He's not allowed to speak. Instead, Grant talks about the grandness of the American experiment. We're no longer apprenticed to Europe and the like. Meanwhile, Colfax, Louisiana, violence. Vicksburg, Mississippi, violence. Hamburg, South Carolina, violence. The enactment of the Mississippi Plan aimed at disenfranchising Black folk and asserting these political coups that would take over the South, even though some of the states are already occupied. So that's 1876. 1926, oh my God. The Roaring Twenties. The Jazz Age. It's really the decade of the Klan. Our colleague, Rachel Maddow, has done such great work on this decade. But Klan, founded in 1915, reaches its pinnacle in the 1920s. Its seminal achievement, Nicole, was the Johnson-Reed Immigration and Nationality Act of 1924. Representative Johnson from Washington was a member of the Klan. Senator Reed from Pennsylvania represented a state with over 250,000 members of the Klan. At one point, the Klan had 6% of the American white population as members. At least that's some conservative number. And they marched down in D.C., thousands of them, not from the South, but from the Midwest and the North. They even claimed that Calvin Coolidge would not have been elected president of the United States if it wasn't for them. Now, this is the key, the divided soul. The Klan was approved initially to have its annual convention on the grounds of the Philadelphia Exposition celebrating the 150th anniversary of the nation. They were going to celebrate the flag and burn a cross at the same time. But there was this odd and powerful coalition of Jewish folk and Irish folk and Black folk who blocked it. But the Klan was clear. They were invested in Nordic Americans. These people who came from S-hole European countries, these swarthy folks, these Irish folk with ambiguous allegiances. They were papists, right? They hated them. These were the America First people. They actually used the language.
Yeah.
And so that's 1926. 1976 is very different. 1976, I talked to Secretary Lonnie Bunch about it. He said in some ways the bicentennial was the commemoration for white ethnic America. So the children and grandchildren of the European immigrants of the 1920s who were seen as infestations are now claiming the revolution as their own. But the nation had to deal with all of the skepticism of Watergate and Vietnam and Black Power and the women's movement, the radicalization of the students' movement. So the bicentennial, which I was 7 years old, wearing red, white, and blue pants that my mom bought me, the bicentennial bore the burden of positing this consensus, Nicole. And I keep thinking about that image in Boston of the young teenager with the American flag attacking Ted Landsmark, a Black Yale lawyer who was just simply rushing to get to a meeting that he was late to. That's the classic image by Stanley Foreman of soiling old glory. This is the anti-busing protest in Boston. Again, the contradiction in full view. And we see it with each anniversary. And here we are in the 250th, dealing with the same ghosts.
If history isn't whitewashed, how would you write the history of this anniversary?
This 250th?
Mhm.
Oh my God. I would tell the truth about our failures and our triumphs. It would be such a serious blues. Actually, the story of the country is told in the music of the book. I commissioned Joel Thompson to score the book. I wanted a musical kind of accompaniment to the argument, and he wrote "And Blue." And each parts of the composition constitute the epigraph to each chapter. And when you listen to it, it'll blow your mind. And so what you hear are these American show tunes and familiar music, and then you hear these blues chords. You hear the upper registers and lower registers of the piano going at each other, and of course the ambivalence that attends all of it. But if I had to write the story, it would be one that would look the ugliness of who we are and what we've done squarely in the face in order to release us into a different way of being together. I said this to someone when I was on the road. I said, imagine a couple that wants to save the marriage, but no one wants to admit the lie that's
Mhm.
at the heart of it. If we're gonna get to the other side of this madness, we have to tell ourselves the truth about why this man showed up in this moment. And I think we can tell a thick story as to why that's the case.
I feel like in public life, Michelle Obama is trying to dance with this story a little bit in the things she said, both in the opening of the library and in her convention speech, I guess, what is it, 2 years ago now. She gave that searing indictment of Donald Trump in the summer of 24 for Kamala Harris's nominating convention, where she talked about how she didn't have the luxury of failing upward. Um, what do you think about her contributions to the conversation? They seem to exceed those of most people in public life.
Yeah, I mean, I think she tries her best to speak as truthfully and directly as she can. The political consulting class has told politicians repeatedly that, you don't want to trigger, right, the racism in the American electorate. So you can't talk about race too much.
Wouldn't you say since 16 it's been pretty triggered by
No,
the right?
I would think so.
That seems insane. Like Trump's been elected twice doing the opposite, like intentionally triggering.
That's why I love you, Nicole Wallace. But it seems that it still shackles the way in which Democrats talk about race, everyone else talks about. So Michelle Obama she's a bit more forthright than
Mhm.
Barack Obama about this sort of stuff. And so I think it plays a significant role. But you know what? I in the book, I trouble more perfect union talk.
Mhm.
Um, and 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 I do so for this reason. As long as more perfect union talk to my ear, Nicole, sounds like a moral holiday.
Mhm.
It works like Catholic confession,
Mhm.
right? That's all I need to do is admit that I've
Like a
sinned.
shortcut.
Exact. I've sinned.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna say
Mhm.
10 Our Fathers, and then I'm okay, and I can go back and do whatever
Go
I
back
wanna
to
do.
the bar. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so we tell ourselves we're always already on the road to a more perfect union. Yes, there was slavery, but the arc bends towards, yes, there are women, yes, but and so what I want is a more blues-soaked orientation to the past, where we're not kind of secure in our innocence or secure in the end in which the country's journeying. There's no guarantee that this experiment will survive. And so I want that. That's what I mean by I want the country to grow up. And so there are moments when the Obamas, which I understand it, that's their brand, they have to traffic in the more perfect union talk.
Mhm.
But in our current days, how can I put this? It sounds like 80s music.
Mm.
It's like, oh, I remember that track. Yes, it was great,
Mhm.
but it would never hit the charts today
Mm.
because the sound has changed. And so I understand the impulse, When I listen to Stevie Wonder's High Ground, yes, I feel it in my heart, but I know it wouldn't hit the charts today because the political lexicon, the landscape has so fundamentally changed in a way that I don't know if that orientation, although it cleanses the palate, is sufficient to address um, the gunk, the mess that we're in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the difference between, you know, changing the rug after a flood and like gutting the black mold from the walls and the foundation.
I
And
see.
I wonder who does that. How do we do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think what we have to do is set the stage for um, this next cohort of folk to do. I've been on this 20-day tour, and I said, I don't want to do to the younger generation what was done to us. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, I only have a short window to have a microphone and a platform because the baby boomers never left. They suck up so much oxygen.
Yeah.
And so part of our task, I think, is to clear the underbrush,
Hmm.
is to take out all of the stuff that's been underwater, soaked, ruined, so that the millennials and the Gen Zers can come in and gut the house and do what's needed to be done to actually get us to the other side of this.
Do you see people doing that? Do you see people in our politics that give you hope?
No names jump off the page immediately. I mean, you mentioned Mamdani, and immediately people think you're a socialist. And I hate these labels. I just want people to try to address the circumstances of folk. We're drowning in greed and selfishness and hatred. And politicians um, manipulate those three things repeatedly. And I just want somebody, whether it's Dave Jolly in Florida or whether it's Mamdani in New York, I don't give a damn where you are in the ideological spectrum. I just
Yeah.
want you to address the circumstances of everyday ordinary folk.
You know, I find the two senators from Georgia to
Oh,
be
Asif and Warnock, yeah.
and like they're totally different, but they're talking differently than everybody else. And they're not falling into any of the traps you're talking about. And they're dealing, I mean, Ossoff with his focus on corruption and like really trusting the audience to understand the details of the grift, like really putting detailed information on the theft of the American taxpayer that is underway from Donald Trump. And then Senator Warnock seems to be speaking the moral language that you and I are talking about, and that you always do. They seem to be really, I don't know, communicating differently right now than anybody else.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that for sure. There's the challenge, of course, is of aligning one's rhetoric with one's policy positions.
Hmm.
I remember with the Biden administration, hearing the Tulsa speech, going, "Oh, oh shit, this is different."
Millions of white Americans belonged to the Klan, and they weren't even embarrassed by it. They were proud of it. And that hate became embedded systematically and systemically in our laws and our culture. We do ourselves no favors by pretending none of this ever happened. We should know the good, the bad, everything. That's what great nations do. They come to terms with their dark sides.
Hmm.
This is
Well, just that he went was different,
yeah,
right?
it was
I mean,
different across the board. And the one thing about Tulsa, it cannot be assimilated into a progressive narrative because it's just violence, raw cruelty. And so I was like, this is different. And then you align it with policies and you say, but we're still in this space. I think what we have to do on the Democratic side, we have to leave the third way behind. The
Mm.
legacy of the DLC has to be put aside because if we're going to do an autopsy of how we got to this moment, we need to understand everything that fertilized the soil that produced it.
What do you mean?
I think the triangulation, the shift from working people to Silicon Valley, you know, the Democratic Party becoming basically Rockefeller Republicans. This is paraphrasing Clinton at one point, Bill Clinton, that
Yeah.
is. We find ourselves in this moment because of a kind of uh, capitulation to corporate interests overrunning democratic processes. And both parties are complicit. Underneath that, of course, is people suffer. And then when people suffer, they reach for the scapegoat. They always have. And we have a ready at hand scapegoat in the United States.
Well, I think of it as the evidence of failure is so abundant, right? You get in trouble because I think people attach politicians and people to it. But if you just step back, like if you live in New York City and you see the excess and the sort of evidence of the billionaire class is everywhere. Like the disparity between the uber rich and people who could barely get by is so glaring. Like who's missing it and who thinks this is working and for whom is it working?
I think, we say that Mark Twain said it, but we're not sure he said it. But history doesn't repeat itself. It damn sure rhymes.
Yeah.
We're in the second Gilded Age.
Yeah.
But it's actually worse. The idea that a trillionaire, that's fucking evil to me.
And like, why was he in charge of USAID? Like, what would a trillionaire possibly know about a program that Democrats and Republicans used as a lever of soft power for the United States of America to make Americans safer all over the world, to make American troops safer all over the world? He destroyed it in like an afternoon.
Yeah,
Why?
and think about all the death and destruction that followed it.
Right.
Think about what happened that happened with Doge and what they unleashed. All of those government workers, particularly Black women, who in the blink of an eye lost their middle class footing. And this guy's a trillionaire. But what's interesting about the end of the 19th century in this moment? You had the Gilded Age, oligarchs seizing power.
Mm-hmm.
You had imperial imagination of the country. Our greatest export isn't just simply baseball. At the moment in which Jim Crow was being solidified in the South, America was exporting its racial logics to Haiti, to Cuba. It's this convergence of these historical dynamics that we're experiencing in our current moment. And I guess, like you said, you just got to be, have to widen the aperture. The evidence is clear. Just look. But, we're shattering mirrors, as I say in the book. Ours is a time of shattered mirrors. We don't want to see it.
The book doesn't end with hopelessness, though, and so I want to spend some time with how it ends. Like it ends, it doesn't. I mean, the opposite of not loving America isn't hating America. Just explain how it ends.
Yeah, I want to change from a preposition to a conjunction. Instead of love of country, love and country. I love this place. It's my home. My great-grandmother is buried in Mississippi. My mom and dad worked their behinds off to make my life possible. Yes, there are wounds, but I love this place. I love the tradition that has made me who I am. There's nothing like listening to Al Green and drinking some brown liquor and having some fried fish or listening to B.B. King or Bobby Blue Bland. I love being me. And that has everything to do with the hard work and the grit of people who taught me not to believe what this world said about me. And I don't need MAGA to appropriate it. I don't need some abstract notion of America to tell me how great that is. I don't need the symbol of the Obamas. I know it in my heart that this is what makes this place swing. Your country, as I say at the end, no. You hear us on your tongue in your English. You taste us in your food. You hear us in the music. You hear us in the literature. We make this place swing, right? And whether you know it or not, we know how we got over. I don't need an affirmation of that. But this is this thing here. One of my students in my Baldwin course, going back to the Baldwin seminar, I started teaching that seminar that year. I gave you the syllabus. I've been teaching it for 10 plus years now. She wrote a paper. She was so sweet, Nicole. She was from Texas. She had young black woman. She had an infectious laugh. She just joy. But Baldwin was beating her up. It was killing her. Come in my office. Doc, I don't crying. I don't think I want a white boyfriend anymore. I mean, it was just existential crisis. And she wrote the paper, and she was charting Baldwin's notion of love from Notes of a Native Son to Evidence of Things Not Seen. And in the end of the paper, she gave me instruction. And I read it, I wrote it in the book. It says, the last sentence of my student's final paper about Baldwin's view of love may serve as a balm. What remains, she wrote, is not hope, but something just as lasting. The insistence on truth, carried by love and lit by rage. She was telling me in that moment, Eddie, Doc, we need you to bear witness. Bear witness. And I end with this notion of love, because Ralph Ellison is right. Democracy at its best is a disinterested form of love. I don't need to know you to care about you and want you to flourish. But in this moment, no Pollyannish stuff, no sentimentality. Tell the truth with love, lit by rage.
It's so perfect. It's so perfect. Is that your wish, I guess, for what people bring into their reflections on July 4th?
Yeah, if we're not angry about our current moment, something's wrong.
Mhm.
If our feet stand on solid ground in this moment, something's wrong. I want, on July 4th, they're going to tell a host of lies. They're going to claim the country as theirs and theirs alone, and they want the rest of us to shut up, be grateful, and disappear. I want us to show our asses. That's what I want. And that could be with barbecues, it could be dance lines, it could be no king's marches. I want the full diversity of the country, because the power of America has never been in the symbol, in the abstraction. The power of America has always been in its people. We just need to get clear on who those people are.
I love that you're one of my people, Eddie Glaude.
Stop. Thank you.
I do. I
my
do. I could talk to you for 4 hours straight.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for everything that you do and that we do together.
Thank you for the book. It's a marvel.
Appreciate you.